I've been working lately with the Nikon S 24-70 Z lens, and it works really well as an all-rounder. It goes quite wide at 24, and then zooms to a decent amount at 70. So you'd really call it a normal range zoom lens. And it has thankfully, a constant aperture of 4. But for an event I was working, I needed a little bit more zoom so we could get close up in cropping into people's faces. So I rented the Nikon 24-200 lens. And this is a little bit heavier, it's a little bit longer, but it has quite a bit more reach at 200 millimeters instead of 70 millimeters. Now, when they're both collapsed or zoomed completely out, you see there is a little bit of difference in length there, not too much. The 24-70 is 1.1 pound, and this is 1.2 pounds. $1,000, $900. Now, I will say this one telescopes a good amount. Then we go over to the 24-200, and it telescopes quite a bit. That's something to keep in mind because if you are doing an event or let's say a wedding, it's not completely silent when you're telescoping out like that. And it's not particularly incognito either. Someone looking over is definitely going to notice when you're zooming in and out. So that's something to keep in mind. And of course, neither of these have electronic zooms. So you're not really, if you're doing video, you're not really going to get a super steady zoom in and zoom out like you would on a camcorder or a motorized lens. But those motorized lenses are tremendously expensive, especially for a full frame camera. You're talking about for in the range of a 24-200 millimeter full frame electronic parfocal lens, you're looking at in the tens of thousands of dollars. So it's a completely different price range. But that's probably not what you're going to be using this lens for anyway. You're not going to be using it for wildlife video, i.e. planet Earth style, because that's a whole other ball game. But I would say if you are deciding between these lenses, and that's maybe why you found this video, I would say the small difference in collapsed length, you're probably going to want to go for the 24-70. I've noticed it's just that much lighter and that much smaller in your bag to the point that I found myself really wanting to put this on my camera more and walk around with it than I would with this. I'd say this is just for me on the size where that's big enough that I would not be walking around town with it. This, I would say I definitely would. I would say this is certainly more of a daily driver, everyday lens. Capture a lot of different types of subjects, whereas this would be more specific to, you know, what you want to capture for that session, for that day, and you've decided you need that amount of zoom. I will say I haven't done a scientific research on it or test on it, but it does seem, and at $900, it's no surprise, at way wide, there's a lot of distortion, of barrel distortion. So it's negligible once if you shoot in JPEG and you have that set to autocorrect, or if you're working RAW and you correct it in post and capture one anyway, you know, you can make it so it's not noticeable. And then of course you bring in Photoshop, you can straighten out all the lines. But it's one of those things you want to get the image as good as possible in RAW as you can beforehand, and it's certainly noticeable as well it is at this with this lens, the 24-70. And then lastly, I'll say that the constant aperture, it may not affect or bother other people, but having the constant aperture in my mind really gives you one less thing to worry about. And there were times, like, 'cause the event was running on the later side, that I wanted to stop down and zoom in, and I didn't have that option because this one is f4 to 6.3, I believe. Yes, 4 to 6.3, So when you're completely zoomed in at 200 millimeters, the widest open you can get is f6.3. And that it's one of those things that you have to keep reminding yourself, okay, I can either just stay at 6.3 and then when I zoom out, it'll stay like that, or know that, okay, I'm going to zoom out at f4 and keep in mind that I have to boost my shutter speed or ISO to compensate for that. So I got to say, if they do, and maybe they will, a constant aperture f4 24-200 would be an amazing lens to have. Because I also recently, for another event, rented the 100-400. Beautiful image quality, but it's really big lens, more expensive lens, and quite a bit heavier. So those two lenses. Those two lenses are not really comparable, but I think the up to 200 was the sweet spot because having to switch between the lens and go not being able to zoom out wider than 100 was also a little bit of an issue for me during a live event. So that's my thought. I would say if you need if you'd like to save $100 and you need a little bit of a tighter crop, go for the 24-200. If a constant aperture is something that's very important to you and a little bit lighter, a little bit smaller package is important to you, go for the 24-7 constant aperture at f4.